Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the News OK studios, and joining me is the Political State crew, Dale and Justin. Gentlemen, how are you?
Fantastic.
Well, welcome to what I'm officially going to be calling Strike Watch 2018. The teachers are threatening to walk out of schools here in 3+ weeks. I actually think NonDoc actually has a counter down to the moment that's going to happen. Yeah, teachers are threatening to walk out of schools unless demands are met, which include a $10,000 pay raise, $5,000 pay raise for school support staff, $200 million in education funding, a pay raise for state employees, healthcare funding. I mean, it's over $800 million this year, eventually $1.4 billion in new spending that they are saying they want, or they're going to walk out in April 2nd. So Dale, how quickly can the legislature put this together and avoid this walkout?
Realistically, they don't have much time. You know, raising revenue for schools, for teacher pay, raising revenue for the state's social service agencies has been the #1 topic at the legislature for the last 8 months to a year, and really the legislature's gotten nowhere. So it's hard for me to think that they can get something together in time within the span of just three weeks or so to get teachers a pay raise and to fill all these funding needs. However, you're looking at quite an ultimatum here, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about teachers walking out of class and essentially what could eventually be a stoppage of public education in Oklahoma. So how do you respond if you're a legislator? Does that shake any kind of motivation into you to vote for something that you previously voted against? I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll get into the politics because that's what we do here on the show. But you talk about the legislature doesn't have much time, but that's if they want to. And like you said, you know, how does that motivate you? Part of what the legislature is going to have to do is come up with a way to fund it. The Oklahoma Education Association, the state's largest teachers union, announced their demands yesterday or on Thursday, and they basically said when it comes to paying for it, that's up to the legislature. They need to decide. So we're not talking. There is no bill. There is no piece of legislation. There is no proposed tax increase. The OEA kind of threw out some ideas like gross production tax and income tax, but simply just saying, hey, there's ways to do it. We believe the legislature can get this done. But this is, This would be the first walkout since 1990, but one big key difference since that walkout in 1990 is it was all over the emergency clause on a bill. House Bill 1017 had passed, but the emergency had failed. They needed 2/3, I believe, at the time to get the emergency passed. They wanted that emergency to have it go into effect immediately, and teachers had a 4-day walkout and eventually got the legislature to approve it. But there was a bill, there was a clause, there was a focus. Here we have a bill, or a price bill, a price tag, but we don't have any legislation yet.
Right, and then there could be a vehicle out there that has some of this stuff in it, but really there's no big presentation saying, well, let's pass House Bill 2010, and that's what we want you to do. No, it's find a way to raise teacher salaries. Yeah.
Well, and you were saying, the legislature has been talking about teacher pay for a while now. We've seen a couple attempts of approving one. Last November we saw one, I think $6,000 teacher pay raise. Last month we saw a $5,000 teacher pay raise. Both of those votes failed to get the 3/4 threshold that was needed in the legislature. Right. So you look at it and say it's been hard enough for the legislature to get a $5,000 teacher pay raise on its own or a part of a package. And now, not only do you double the request to $10,000, but you throw in, quite a bit.
State employees.
Without judging the validity of that request, it's a big ask. It was already a big ask, and now it seems like quite a huge one.
And teacher pay was always sort of secondary to all of those bills. Right, the first thing that they had to do was fully fund the Department of Human Services, Healthcare Authority, and the Department of Mental Health. That was always the #1 goal in those revenue discussions, and eventually teacher pay made it onto a lot of those priority lists. But really it was secondary to the most immediate thing that was at hand, which was those 3 agencies that lost money in the shortfall. And now you've got those agencies pretty much taken care of for the most part. and now the teachers are saying, now it's time for us. You got to think about us, and realistically, the legislature is going to have a funding bill, and then however many bills it takes to spend that money, and they really have to have something presented next week to have the time to go through everything, because it takes at least a week for a bill to get through the legislature and signed by the governor.
Yeah.
I assumed when I heard the demands, and I'm going to call them demands rather than asks from the teachers union, because there's an ultimatum at the end, I assumed that they're starting very high and that they would come down. Is that the sense you got? You were there at the press conference. You know these people as well as anybody. What was your sense?
Well, in the Alicia Priest, the OEA president, in her prepared remarks, I mean, she was very clear that this is what we're asking for, and schools will shut down until we get it. The first question that I had, the first question of the press conference was, how much wiggle room are these in those numbers? Is this a negotiation? And you could say she dodged the question, but I don't know. She said, this is what we're asking for. This is the ask. So, I mean, so to me, I kind of initially took that as like, well, that's not a direct yes or no. And of course, she's not going to say, oh, of course, $10,000 is just our starting. You know, we're willing to go down. Sure. It's not how negotiation. You don't want to play negotiations that way. But I think, by all indications, they're firm to these requests. And even if they're willing to have some wiggle room on some of the amounts, do they have enough wiggle room to drop something? Like, are they willing to say, hey, the state employee pay, we'll drop that from this, or we'll drop school funding, or we'll drop, or whatever it may be. They may come down on all those areas, but they still, to me, have committed themselves to those areas. The other thing you have to wonder is, this is the union saying it, and we can get into this a little bit later, but it seems, I feel like the teachers have really kind of pushed the union to call this quickly. Will the teachers be pleased with that? Now they put $10,000 pay raises out there. What if they come back and say, no, 4 is the best we can get, or 5? I mean, it just kind of matters. It depends on how our teacher is going to be pleased with that.
It is interesting the way this cropped up on social media. That was such a big influencer. Very much a 2018 way of coming to this point.
Yeah.
I mean, you have teachers organizing on social media and their supporters, and yeah, maybe even pushing the union to act on something like this, pushing certainly districts to figure out how they're going to handle this.
Yeah.
And it's just such a different way of, if they haven't called a strike yet, but getting towards that direction. I mean, even going down that path using social media it's interesting.
Can't you understand though why the teachers union, if they were hesitant, why they would be hesitant to say we're going to strike? Because a teacher strike is really the final option. It's the last thing in their quiver. After a teacher strike, after you walk out, what else is there?
Yeah.
What other demands can you make?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. The OEA executive director, David Duvall, I actually sat down with him a few months ago and had an interview with him about the 1990 strike, of which he was at the OEA at the time, was in the room when the decision was made. And I actually have a story in Sunday's paper that kind of pulled some parts from that conversation. I mean, he'll tell you, it was a stressful time. I mean, one, you call a strike, you don't know if your teachers are going to respond. They did in 1990. But two, how does this end? Like, what if the legislature just doesn't do anything? I mean, how long is too long? What if you get to a week and then a month? I mean, it was only 4 days in 1990, but when you make that decision, you're thinking worst case scenario in your mind, and worst case is that nothing happens. And then at what point do you call it quits? And that is a huge blow. I mean, it's one thing to negotiate, but to call a strike, to mobilize teachers, and then, a month later to say, it's not going to work out, we all have to go back. I mean, you're just not going to have happy people on both sides of the issue. So yeah, I think the OEA was probably hesitant. Now, they've been talking about strike being a possibility. I mean, they've said that for months now. I think that they probably thought, because there was no bill, that we can't call a strike without some piece of legislation, and maybe something like this GPT state question that could be coming this year to raise it to 7%. That should be what we put all our eggs in the basket of, and really kind of mobilize around that, marketing around that. Yeah, teachers were not willing to wait.
Yeah, and it's really no surprise, because the the political force behind the teacher movement, the education movement, has felt like it's been growing.
Yeah.
Over the past couple of years, and the frustration that led to so many teachers being filing for office, and several being elected, all in the name of teacher pay and education, paying school appropriations, better school appropriations. I guess this might be the head of all of that work.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've been coming to this moment for a while. It shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, maybe how the logistics of it worked out this week, maybe, but the fact that we've come to this point shouldn't be too surprising. You're exactly right, and we've seen teacher rallies at the Capitol over the last few years. We've seen a state question effort to increase the sales tax that failed by a vote of the people, but we saw the legislature say, hey, majority of the legislature seemed to be against it and said, hey, it's our job, we'll get this figured out. It didn't happen. We've seen teachers run for office, so you're right. I mean, what other boxes there really to check? I mean, if you're a teacher, that's probably what you're asking. What else can I do? But walk off the job. Right. Now, walking off the job for teachers, the hope is that you're putting some pressure on lawmakers. Is that a given, that if schools close, that the public is going to side with teachers, especially those that maybe now are having to juggle their kids and all the other challenges that go along with it?
That'll be the message that the teachers and the teachers union have to present to people. Will the teachers union and the teachers be going on TV, airing ads, talking to people like us? Constantly, I think they'll pretty much have to do it every day during the strike to remind people this is why we're doing it, right? Otherwise, people, the general public might forget. But the pressure that they put on lawmakers is the important part, right? And Oklahoma Watch reported that the president of the Senate, or President Pro Tem of the Senate, Mike Schultz, really doesn't foresee the legislature giving in to the teachers' demands. And even just a pay raise, he gave it a 50-50 odds.
So just the pay raise component.
Just a pay raise.
And probably not the 10,000.
Right.
And it should be noted that they've said, hey, we'll take 6,000 in year one to give you 3 years to get up to 10,000. But yeah, I talked to Representative Tammy West today, a former school board member, who was saying that, listen, we're still working on 5,000. 10,000's impossible. It's not going to happen this year. Yeah. While the OEA was meeting yesterday, McCall sent out a statement saying that, hey, we're still working for 5,000, and I still believe we can get there. So, I mean, and the 10,000 figure had been out for days, so he was well aware what they were going to be requesting. So, I mean, so far we haven't seen any indication from legislative leaders yet that they are eager to start working on these demands, right?
Yeah, any more than they already have.
Yeah, and like I said, they've been doing this for a while. I do think that public opinion is still to be determined. I mean, we've seen polling that shows that a lot of Oklahomans are in favor of schools getting more money, teachers getting more pay. And when you ask that as just a blanket question, I think the majority of Oklahomans in numerous surveys and polls has said, yes, we support that. A lot of Oklahomans said that they supported teacher pay raises before State Question 779, and that ended up getting defeated. So when you actually start to put the dollars and cents, on paper, and families start to see how this is going to impact us, and see, we don't even know how it's going to be funded. We don't know what kind of taxes and what kind of debate it's going to be over. I mean, man, there's just so much. I feel like we don't even know the half of it yet. Not even just what the strike will look like, but just like what can be done on that.
A lot of unanswered questions.
I'll just put it this way: if the legislature met these demands, it would be one of the most, I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but I mean, we would have never seen anything like it. To see an Oklahoma legislature mobilize A, quickly, and B, around one of the largest tax increases in history, if not the biggest, would be quite a shocking.
You said asking about $800 million
in year one, but eventually getting to $1.4 billion.
Yeah, it would be the most impressive thing I've ever seen the legislature do, and to do it in the span of 3 weeks or 4 weeks if you can't get it done before they start striking. That's I don't want to say it's impossible, but I haven't seen the legislature do anything like that before. Outside of natural disasters.
Yeah. So what did you think? I mean, that's why it surprised me. The OEA request surprised me how big it was. I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm just saying, given, like you're right, given the history of the legislature so far, they're not tossing them a softball. That's for sure on this one. Well, what else is going on at the state capitol this week, Dale?
Well, we're going to keep Charles McCall as Speaker. The Republicans held a caucus meeting, and it's all done behind closed doors. It's all within the Republican caucus. But they all voted to they didn't all vote, but a majority of them voted to keep Charles McCall as Speaker of the House. He originally had 4 challengers. 3 of them dropped out, leaving just him and Enid State Representative Chad Caldwell. They've both been in the legislature, I think about the same time, if not they began at the same time. But ultimately, Charles McCall won. We don't know the vote tally. I don't even know if they keep a vote tally. If they tell the other members that, they just say who got the most votes. But we'll have Charles McCall Speaker, presumably, unless something happens, for the next 2 sessions.
Yeah. Was it odd for a standing speaker seeking to keep that role to face that many challengers, or is that just kind of par for the course?
I think sometimes you may have a challenger, but to draw 4 challengers, including some lawmakers, and these weren't fringe lawmakers. Representative Tommy Hardin, Todd Russ, Chad Caldwell, and Charles Ortega. These weren't sort of on the way outside of the political spectrum trying to challenge a speaker who's too centrist or too, willing to work with the other side, or whatever the case may be. I think there's some real division still within the House GOP caucus, and it showed in the number of people who originally wanted to challenge Charles McCall. Eventually, they were convinced that they either didn't have enough votes or that it would be better in their favor to step down from challenging him. But ultimately, the vote showed that a majority of the Republicans wanted to keep Charles McCall.
Yeah, well, and McCall's not a fringe lawmaker either. I mean, so do you feel like, do you think it kind of spoke that there are some in the Republican Party who felt like, we want kind of a moderate voice, moderate for Republican, or what do you think it kind of says about some grumblings in the caucus?
Well, and even I wouldn't call him a moderate.
Well, not moderate by like from the left to the right, but I mean even for
maybe
Republicans,
a moderated
Republican.
Yeah.
Not the fringe Republican that he's a banker. He's kind of I think. I don't know that he's somebody who wants to focus a lot sometimes on a lot of these social bills or controversial bills. Right. I mean, for him, he mainly talks about the budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what was said behind those closed doors, but Speaker McCall had to convince the members of his caucus that he was the best one for the job, that he was the best at the negotiating table when it came to Democrats, that he was the best sitting in the governor's office trying to hammer out a deal that she would sign. And they also had to think about what was coming up next, specifically who was going to be the next governor, who was going to be the next president pro tem of the Senate, because Mike Schultz is term limited, he cannot run again. And what's the political landscape going to look like for the next 2 years? Will a gross production tax increase pass? Who knows?
Yeah.
What kind of challenges are they going to face financially if Oklahoma's economy doesn't stop leveling out in an upward direction?
Yeah.
And obviously they thought he's the man.
Yeah, man, talking about what the political landscape is going to look like in 2 years. I don't know what it's going to look like in 2 weeks right now. I mean, it's quite a bit moving. Some criminal justice reform bills also making their way through, or? That's
right. This generated a lot of hubbub at the end of last session, and it kind of got forgot about because of the shortfall and the fight for budget revenue. But at the end of last session, there were a number of criminal justice reform bills that were blocked in committee by the chairman. That chair is no longer in the legislature, and seemingly those bills would be free to move along. However, prosecutors of Oklahoma have been blamed for continuing to hold these bills up, and the person signing that blame is former Speaker of the House Chris Steele, who is one of the biggest figures in criminal justice reform, and so what happened this last week is that Governor Fallin announced, standing alongside prosecutors, that these bills would be able to now move forward. They wouldn't be advanced in their current form; they would be changed. We don't know the exact changes yet, but they're going to come out of a conference committee and presumably be voted on in the House and Senate in the next week or two.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting to watch those. So other business is still going on, but we expect this education funding fight to become the dominant headline here moving forward.
This next week is a deadline week. It's going to be very, very busy for lawmakers. They've got probably hundreds of bills to get through, to get off the floor and sent to the other chamber across the rotunda.
Yeah. Also worth noting, I guess we had a special election earlier this week, a Republican seat that stayed in Republican hands.
Yep.
I think we've kind of seen, it feels like, over the last year, a lot of attention the Democrats have been able to pick up some seats, and a lot of it was blamed on voter frustration towards maybe the Republicans in control. I think there's part of that, but it also, these were some more moderate districts or districts that were maybe trending in the other direction. But so far, the last couple of races, these strongly Republican seats have pretty much stayed that way.
Yeah, you're talking about Chickasha, southwestern Oklahoma. The guy that they elected before was the same guy who I mentioned earlier was holding up those criminal justice bills in committee. He was very conservative. And so we now have the mayor of Marlow, Brad Bowles, who was elected to fill that seat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do we have any more special elections coming up before the primaries? I think that's it, right?
I think that's probably it. We've got Casey Murdoch was just elected to the Senate from the House, and so his seat is going to be vacant. And I don't think they're going to try to fill it before the primary, because the filing for the primary election happens very, very soon. Yeah,
I don't think they're filling that. I mean, I know Senator Holt's seat, as he leaves to become mayor of Oklahoma City, I believe will stay vacant until the election in November. Primaries in June and then election in November. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Political State. You can find us each and every Friday here at News OK. Join us next week. We'll continue to talk about the latest in Oklahoma politics with Justin and Dale. I'm Ben. We'll see you next week.